Hey everybody, this is Steven with Improbable Wargaming, and we're joined again by Mr.
Kyle McCord.
And we are here to talk about Mission E, which is Take and Hold, Chosen Battlefield, and Sweeping Engagement for how the map is set up.
I have a question, Steven.
Shoot.
Did you forget to put out the objective markers?
It's a great question. No, I didn't. I don't think I did. You tell me.
Oh, no.
Nope. So with Chosen Battlefield, we only have one in each of our deployment zones and one in the center of the battlefield.
Oh.
From there, we can generate more as long as they're 6 inches away from the board edge and 9 inches away from another objective not within your deployment zone.
So what's going to happen is, this is a little different than the ritual. With the ritual, you can generate a bunch of objectives. Instead, what happens is, we talk sometimes about player place terrain, where you put all your, where you get to put your buildings where you want to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Largely. This, you get one player placed objective. Now, there are some really good places to put this objective that we're going to talk about, right? So that's really the key thing with this mission.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two different armies. I'm going to talk about a more passive army where you might be playing back. And then, Steven, if you want to talk about an aggressive army.
Sure. I'll talk about aggressive.
So we'll start with the passive army. So what you want to do is, there's a very logical place to put your objective. Now, your opponent will probably, if they're a clever player, if they played this before, know that you're probably going to put it there. Your rule is you have to be not in a deployment zone, and you have to be at least 6 inches away from the board edge. Now, what it doesn't say, and this is important, is that you can't do this right on my board edge. And in fact, you might say, but Kyle, part of this hangs into the deployment zone. That is true, but that objective marker is not in the deployment zone, and that's important. So we're 6 inches off here. So we have our objective here, and then we have a nice, safe way to go ahead and fortify right here. That's going to get us at least 10 a turn. And then we always talk about triangles. You got a triangle here, where you can control these three, and that's going to give you actually 15 points a turn because it's a fairly generous objective. And so I would recommend, unless you are playing a very aggressive army, this is probably the move. Right? Because you can't really place it here because it's too close to other objectives. If you place it over here, it's not a bad idea, but it means putting a lot of your army over this.
You might be a little close, but it'll be like over here.
That's right. And
close.
It feels like your opponent is able to deploy more of their army to engage this.
Yeah, you're really lining up too close to your opponent's deployment zone, and they're going to definitely come mess with that.
Now, what if I'm playing orcs, Steven? What if I'm playing world eaters? What if I just am playing Tau, but for some reason I have all axes?
If I'm playing as orcs, or if I'm playing as world eaters, then I'm looking more placing over here. I want to be 9 inches away. I want to put everything here to hold this triangle, have something little back there, and then make my opponent come deal with me, and more likely I'm going to deal with them.
So you're saying this might be jackals.
That might be jackals.
There might be some jackals.
And then there's an assassin standing back there.
There's an assassin standing back there. And then right here, we've got guys pushing. We've got our orc boys pushing, right? And then
we got Angron attacking turn one.
Yeah. Angron ain't here. Angron's over there. But key thing here is, with this is setting up the triangle so it's in the most natural position possible.
Yep.
Now, you might be asking, why are we talking about triangles so much? Well, this is a mission that actually does significantly pay out in terms of points you can take. So it's take and hold, which is, if you guys are familiar with it, it's kind of classic ITC. So you're going to get 5 for holding your home. You're going to get 5 for holding that natural expansion, 5 if you take this one, 5 if you take that one, right? And so really what you want to do is, it's somewhat unlikely that you will get a 50. A very aggressive army that rolls over their opponent, maybe. Because what you're really trying to aim for is, if you're going first, and you got that defensive army, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to get a 10 here, maybe on a lucky turn where they're not able to push me off. Maybe you got something like Bullgrin, or you've got something that's really hard to move. I got a 20-man blob of Creek. I'm going to slap him right there. Let's pick a non-guard example. Like, I got a big unit of Wraith Guard.
Yes.
Good freaking.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'm going to get my 15, right? Or if I'm going second, I get to score at the bottom of my turn, and I'm banking on that 15, where I'm going to get the 10, 10, and then I'm looking at 45. 45 is a pretty respectable score on this, especially given that we only have 5 objectives. And there has to be 2. In order to get a 50, you'd have to have 2 turns where you got to stay and get a 15, right? Where you got 3. And I think most competitive players are not going to let you get there, right? They're going to find ways to disrupt your scoring, especially because everything's so close together here. Right?
Exactly. It's very close. You're looking at like generously scoring 10 a turn, I think. And if your opponent's scoring 15, you better like really figure out how to stop it, because otherwise they're going to run away with the primary.
Like 100% agree. So in terms of deployment, Stephen, let's imagine you're playing Harlequins, right? Okay, so Harlequins, fast moving.
It's kind of, Harlequins are a trick in the sense that they can play a defensive game while being aggressive because they're so fast. So I would go with this a defensive setup, because for most armies, this is a long distance away from each other. But for Harlequins, this is nothing, and they'll be in this point whenever they want. And I think defensive for them is good because they're a glass hammer. They want to always be hitting you and not getting hit. So you don't want to be aggressive and put it here because they can't hold up to people keep coming at them. So being farther back and then always being within reach of your opponent, this is the way I would do it.
100%. And one of the things to say about deployment here is that it's actually, I think with some aggressive armies is pretty tricky to corner your opponent on this mission, because they've got a really wide line here, and you're able to put units right back here, right. So you've got bop, 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 and these guys are able to keep a pretty long distance over here. So this is a mission that, for example, with my guard, I'm super excited to see. Because I'm like, okay, I get to fortify these two. If I go second, I'm going to push a Doran onto this on the last turn, or maybe I'm going to do it on the turn before. Right, and it's very difficult to hide your whole army. Because your opponent's able to get angles here, they get angles here, angles here. So if you've got a lot of fragile stuff, what you're going to have to do is you're probably going to have to play some stuff from reserves, right?
Potentially, yes.
Potentially, you're going to want to deep strike in. If you're playing a stalwart army, you're playing Custodes.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good mission because you're like, okay, I can push into the middle. I'm going to be able to get that 15.
Because they're definitely going to put theirs here. They're just going to ball up and come at you in a death ball like they always do.
If you're playing Dark Angels, they got no reason not to. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, for sure. It's this mission is very interesting in that regard because it kind of favors both sides. If you want to be aggressive, set up on the line, you're not far from them. If you're a defensive army, you can go all the way back to the corner. You know, there's a lot of options, and because of the board length, you can slip around the sides. There's no way for an army to truly cover every angle on this.
Absolutely, and you also are going to want to be very conscious of how your opponent deploys. If, for example, you're like, I'm an army that's right here on the line, and the first thing that they do is they're like, okay, cool, here's my 3 Redemptors, right? You will want to respond to that, right? Especially because then it's a coin flip, right? They go first, you go first, and I will tell you that a Redemptor is very hard to kill. Right? So if you're like, I'll just run everything into it and that'll do it, I have doubt about that, right? And I will also say that it also means that they're responding to what you're doing. So if you have something like a redeploy in this mission,
this is a good time for it.
It's a great time for it, right? Because you're like, okay, bop, 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 they drop their 3 Redemptors there. There's their objective over there, and you're like, my objective's right over here. Okay, cool. I'm actually going to go over here. Right. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's actually a real problem, right? You know, you are threatening this objective. The Redemptors aren't as close. That charge isn't as easy, right? And so you can use ruses and things like that to really mess with your opponent's deployment because it's so sensitive.
I agree. So it sounds like to me the big important thing to do is know if your army is going to be aggressive or more defensive,
right?
And then know those options. If you're an aggressive army, we're looking more like over here for a deployment or another objective marker. If you're more defensive army or an army that's very fragile, then we're looking at being further away, and then just being very cognizant of your opponent's deployment. And then just trying to maximize your movement and holding what you have to do. You need to score a minimum of 10 around here and make sure your opponent is at 10 as well. If you can keep them to 5, you're probably doing really well. And then on turn 4 and 5, that's where you're trying to punch up into the 15s and really seal the deal. I feel like anything you want to add to it?
We'll say as well that if you're thinking about fixed objectives on this mission, it's not a bad place to play them.
That's true.
Because let's say that you're like, you know what, I'm gonna just settle for the first few turns getting teleport homers here. Your opponent has a very wide objective, or sorry, deployment zone, so they have to defend a huge amount of that. If they're playing knights or something like that,
that's a good point.
they're not going to be able to do that. So if they have a kill secondary and you want to deploy, or It's not a great mission necessarily to cleanse, because in order to cleanse, you got to go here, you got to go here,
Yep.
or you have to have taken their objective, which isn't really favorable.
Yeah,
Right.
Actually, this mission would be great for Harlequins as well, because we could do the teleporter homers and behind enemy lines kind of mentality, and then they have to try to keep me out while I just feed a boat in a turn and do the things I need to do. So yeah, that's a good point. This is lends itself very well to that kind of fixed objectives. I like that.
Yep, absolutely. So I think here what we're boiling it down to just 3 key points. One, remember that one of the interesting features of this is it has a very wide deployment zone that has a lot of effects on the game. We've talked about them here. You can go back through them in the video. Secondly, we got these objective markers, right? And so you're going to get to place one. We really want to get that close to our line, no matter what we're doing, right? And remember that we can hang it over here so that we can actually hold it from our zone. Thirdly, really remembering that this is a primary sensitive mission. That means that if you disrupt your opponent, that can be huge. If you can push out and get that 15 without losing huge amounts of resources, that's going to end up paying off, especially as once we get to that scoreboard at the end.
Agreed. Well, as always, we're going to continue on with these. We'll get to servo skulls eventually, but for now, we are wrapping this one up. So join us with the next video and see you next time. This is Steve with Improbable Wargaming and
Kyle McCord.
See you next time.